G'day, Adrian Hart here. I was just going to say something a little bit more about people with BPD and their feelings and how they often don't talk about it. They don't know what they're feeling. And then they'll say other things, and they're very inconsistent, and they don't seem to mean, or they don't follow through with the actions or behavior of what they say. And a lot of people, understandably, find this really confusing, hurtful, painful, all kinds of different, really not positive experience with this, with people with BPD. And what's really important to note first and foremostly about this is that people with BPD do have arrested emotional development and don't have emotional intelligence. So to gain or to change that and to really do all the work necessary to heal, be in a healing journey, recovery journey from BPD, to keep increasing that emotional intelligence. A lot of people with BPD are very intellectually intelligent, and they continue to use that intellectual intelligence up here to compensate for lack of emotional intelligence. And this can be seen not only in people who are untreated with BPD, where it might be more raw, more confusing, more chaotic, more dramatic, etc. But it can also be seen and experienced, and you can be really, lots of people are very highly confused by what borderlines won't talk about, what they will talk about, what they won't say, what they do say versus how they act. What do they really mean? What don't they mean? It becomes a big sort of like nonsensical, irrational experience for people on the other side of people with BPD. And then when relationships break up or you get ghosted, you will go back through a lot of that and trying to figure out like what happened and what but they said they loved me, but they said this, but they said that, and like how could they just do this or that? And that happens when you're in a relationship with them too. Any relationship type, it's not just when they've ghosted you, or you're not their favorite person anymore, or maybe you're not friends anymore, whatever the case may be. And the other point about this, in terms of the lack of emotional intelligence for most people with BPD, it takes a lot of therapy to change that. And it really isn't changed because people with BPD continue to intellectualize and sometimes weaponize their intellectual overcompensations and mistake that for that they're more emotionally mature, when often they're not. Even when maybe they've had 3, 5, 7 years of therapy and treatment off and on. Because without doing the really deeper work, which really is about full recovery, then to varying degrees, a lot of people with like 5 years or 3 years, 5, 7 years of therapy off and on, they may have learned a lot. Not just DBT, by the way, but with that, they may have really learned a lot, and they may really be able to be aware of more. But they'll be aware of it in retrospect if in fact they're not still defending against the ways in which they've affected people that they've been relating to in any relationship type. Because it still is very much about splitting, very much about being triggered, very much about transference, projection, projective identification, disavowing their personal responsibility, not understanding their personal responsibility and accountability in a situation for what they say, how they act, what they do, how self-absorbed they can be. They're just kind of, with a lot of people with BPD, even if they've had 5 or 7 years worth of treatment, but they haven't done that deeper work, then they're stuck in this place where they're using intellectual intelligence to compensate for lack of emotional intelligence, and they're often fooling themselves more than they're even trying to fool you. So this whole thing, people with BPD don't, unless they really get, now I have to say, not unless significant treatment, because significant treatment can't be that wholly significant when people stop short of the rest of the process. So like I said, even if they've had 5 or 7 years worth of therapy and grown a lot, but if they still split, and whether they're aware of it or not, and they still kind of, are looking into the concept of, well, it's not fair, that's still emotionally immature. It's not fair. It should be fairer. It should be this way. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have said this. And then they'll jump on what you have said, maybe, or something you said because you were frustrated. They'll jump on that, and it'll be the reason why, like, you're all wrong and they're all right. And people with BPD can go, in a heartbeat from feeling less than, and really that shame wound, that I'm not good enough, that I'm bad. They'll feel that a lot. And then they can turn that around when they think or perceive or misperceive or just start splitting and devaluing you, that you've now done something, like maybe you just were, frustrated with something, and you share it with them, whether it's about them or not. Next thing you know, they're going to grab that, because what they're going to do is take themselves out of a position for why ever they feel unokay. They're going to try to make you feel unokay so they can feel okay. And that's a part of BPD that really, it's evident when somebody can still do that they really they haven't done enough recovery. They have deeper work to do still. And the other thing about that is, so that can come even when people have had substantial therapy, actually, amounts of time, and learn things. But this emotional lack of emotional intelligence really probably doesn't get deeply enough changed for healthy, reasonable relating in a consistent, congruent, adult, healthy way until unless probably full recovery. I think that's probably something that I should have put out there in more, specific terms like that. And so people with BPD will say, everything's fine 1 minute, and then you don't know what's happening the next minute. Oh no, you did this, you did that, you said this, you said that. Whether you said something along those lines or not, the meaning is misperceived. The trigger has happened, whether they know it or not, no matter what kind of treatment they've had or none. Where there is still, idealization and devaluation, or devaluation and maybe not so much devaluation, doesn't rise to idealization, where there's still projective identification and projecting a lot onto people, or onto you in the case of the person with BPD that is in your life or was in your life, splitting is the first sign, that something's wrong, first and foremostly. And secondly, when people continue to split, even if they've had 5 or 7 years worth of treatment, it's the big red flag for, hey, but guess what? They still don't really fundamentally know who they are. They might still be well enmeshed with family or another, unhealthy cluster B type person. And so they're then in an overcompensatory place, whether they realize it or not. And they continue to believe what their narrow lens of experience and they don't always catch, even after years of therapy, they don't always catch this splitting and this transference or projective identification and projecting. And so they'll say one thing 1 minute and everything's fine, and then the next minute, and they don't say anything in between if for some reason that it would help you to know that perhaps they're feeling like they don't want you to talk to them right now, or they're feeling something else, and you could adjust accordingly, but they don't give you that opportunity. And it's like a setup, but it's not really a conscious setup. So people keep asking different ways and comments on the channel. The more I talk about it, so I thought I'd try to talk about it some more. Because the thing is, people with BPD are emotionally immature. They overcompensate, like I said, with intellect, and it can fool people. They use songs a lot, song lyrics, poetry. They get really sort of absorbed and obsessed with that, because that becomes a vehicle for communication in an emotional sense that they still don't have the maturity to do with their own feelings without being triggered in their lives. So they often will say one thing and behave exactly the opposite. And they'll often, when they get into devaluation, yes, it could be ghosting. It could just be a real pushback. It could be they don't want to talk to you anymore, or whatever the case. But what's really important about all of this and more is you can't make sense out of what has no sense to make any sense out of. So people with BP and their emotions and all this incongruent, what they will talk about, what they will say, that might not be what's happening in the here and now for everybody else, how they perceive and misperceive things, how the triggers intersect with the fact that their reality is skewed in the here and now. All these things mean that no matter how many years of therapy they have, they're not knowing themselves enough yet. They don't trust themselves enough. Their codependency could be rampant to the point where they're trying to people please all of the time. And so when they're doing that, then of course for many people with codependency, but with BPD it gets a little more, it's more difficult to manage than for people with codependency without BPD. But they will often get into a very angry place. They, the quote, no good deed goes unpunished, end quote, because I've been saying that online for over 25 years now. But they might throw that out and think that because, whoa, they feel like they're always the one that got hurt, don't you know? No matter how much they hurt you, they're always the one that feels like you hurt them. Because it goes back to repetition compulsion of unresolved family of origin work, and they haven't got enough therapy yet. And that sounds like a really loud truck. So, trying to understand why people with BPD say what they say one minute and do what they do opposite or opposing to that the next minute, or they love you, and boom, they ghost you. They take off, they don't tell you. I heard recently on a live stream somebody say, yeah, it's a really good truck. Say that, a person they were with just took off to another country and never told them. Well, this is all about their lack of self still. No matter how much treatment, unless they're fully recovered, this will change. I happen to know that I don't do any of that stuff anymore, though, people could think that's what I'm doing just because there's so much stigma to BPD, it can get thrown at me in a heartbeat, especially by people with BPD. But they don't realize their own projections. So this is what happens to many other people as well. And I think it's really important to realize that as part of your recovery, if the relationship is ended and you've been ghosted or what have you, that as you're doing your recovering and healing and there's no closure, mostly, most people don't get closure from somebody with BPD. Well, the thing is, part of your work in healing is to find that closure for yourself. Not to want to recontact them to go around in circles again, because that's all that's going to happen. So why they can't talk about the feelings and emotions is because they never learned how. They still don't know who they are, and they don't know what they feel, and they feel too much, and they're trying to escape what they feel, and then they externalize everything they're feeling onto you anyway. So it all becomes, quote, your fault. You did it. You made me feel whatever. And none of that's accurate, but that's what they really believe. And then you can get into the fog, the fear, the obligation, and the guilt, and much more. So here's what's important to know about this, okay? And it's compelling for people, especially after long relationships with somebody with BPD or marriage, or even dating for a long time or a short time. It's really important. And it's hard on friends too, but, it levels and degrees of things, but it's really important to know that you can't make sense out of what they couldn't make sense out of. That they showed you so much incongruence. Said one thing, did the other. Did something, then said the opposite of what they did. Lack of personal accountability, lack of personal responsibility, lack of congruence because they really still don't have a cohesive self. That self-reference I'm always talking about. That can happen to people, and they can still be in that place and be triggered to splitting cycles after 5 or 7 years worth of therapy. If they don't go to the deeper dive of completing what's necessary in recovery from BPD in a therapeutic sense, then they're not there yet. But a lot of them might think they are, or there's nothing wrong with them and it's all your fault. That lens, that viewpoint is enough to let you know that it's not you and it's them, because they're so black and white about that too. So when you're if you're going around these cycles and circles with yourself now, to try to figure out why did they say this one minute and that the next minute, then it goes to do etc. It's really painful, but what's really important about that is to know that you can work this through in a healing recovery process to the point where you definitely don't need it to be your main focus right now. You need to be taking care of you. And of course it's compelling. It's part of emotional and cognitive dissonance. And it's also part of like Stockholm Syndrome for some people. And it can be, a lot of other things involved there. It just is so, you feel like you can't move on. You feel like you can't stand the pain you're in right now. Maybe till you figure this out. Guess what? It's not really ever going to be figure outable because it doesn't make sense, and especially logically, it's nonsensical. So what people who are stuck in this cycle, and it happens to everybody probably after like important or significant other relationship breakups, maybe family related, going no contact situations, to some degree for some friends maybe, but not for all. You're trying to make sense out of the senseless, and you're trying to put your logic to their lack of emotional maturity, to their lack of emotional intelligence. So think about it that way maybe, and let's see what kind of comments I get here. What do you feel? If you still have more questions, let me know. Does this clarify anything, or do you still not know what to do with the emotions you're in, the feelings you're having, the lack of closure? Because something might well be blocking you. And this focus on trying to figure out why they can't talk about how they feel, I'll do more on that, and why they say things and then behave the opposite. They have no congruence. They don't know how to relate to themselves as a self in a whole part object way, so they can't ever see anybody else as a whole object. And maybe you've heard something like, I actually heard this recently, but have you ever heard somebody say, it was from a client, but have you ever heard somebody say, I can accept the good in you, but I can't accept the bad, which is inherently splitting at its base, and then have them deny that they're splitting? They lack emotional intelligence, they still don't know who they are, and then they externalize it all out for you to try to figure out, or they want you to carry their load for them. So again, it really comes back to getting into a healing recovery journey with somebody who's expert enough at this. If you resonate with me, I'm out here because I get this stuff inside out. You really need to work on why are you focusing on something that isn't going to bring you closure. It feels emotionally compelling, you're in agony, I get that. But beyond that, you're not going to be able to figure it out. I only understand it because I have BPD and recovered, I think. And maybe there's other ways to look at it, but largely, trying to make sense out of nonsense, out of something that doesn't make any sense, has no logic to it. These people with BPD with still not an integrated self, even after 5 or 7 years of therapy, because they don't finish the rest of it. They don't develop that sense of self that is integrated and cohesive and consistent and healthier. They don't grow enough emotionally, and they think they do because they overcompensate with their intellect, but they're still really hurting and they're still really reeling, and they still are doing everything they were doing before, maybe not as often, maybe they're even less aware of it now than they might have been when they were in therapy, but they're splitting, they're projecting, they're externalizing, and they're blaming you, and you're left holding that bag, and it's really compelling. But just know, you can't, people with BPD aren't just about to tell you how they really feel. And they're going to say things all the time, like in relationships, some of the other relationships, I really love you, and show you something opposite 5 or 10 minutes or a day or a week later, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, approach avoidance, push, pull, splitting cycles, and it's not logical. So if you're trying to apply logic to it today to help yourself with pain, please understand in your own recovery and healing process, trying to apply logic to your pain is going to get you blocked and stuck right now. And what people with BPD do is it's the magical thinking of they believe what they feel is real. There's no logical grounding to that. They lack significantly to the point of many of them having almost zero emotional intelligence. So don't you apply logic. Not going to help you to apply logic to your emotions right now, as they do the opposite. You know, they let their feelings guide them all over the place as if it's logical. So I hope that was helpful. Take care. If I can find the off button, that would be really good. Sun in the face doesn't help with that.